evening and welcome to another edition of Filmnut. I am your host, Jeff Schubert. Glad you can join us. Well, you know what? Love it or hate it, there is no denying the impact of reality TV on the entertainment landscape. From MTV's The Real World to Survivor to American Idol and everything in between, clearly the public has a fascination with unscripted programming, which of course begs the question, why do they have writers? Maybe my guest tonight knows the answer to that, and I'm definitely going to ask her. She knows about all things reality, and I'm very excited to have her on a special edition of Reality Nut. We're going to deviate from film tonight and talk about reality. It's going to be a lot of fun. My guest tonight, from network to cable, is a reality editing machine, having worked on such shows as The Biggest Loser, which she is currently working on, Beauty and the Geek, Amazing Race, A Shot of Love with Tila Tequila, Shaq's Big Challenge, Pros vs. Joes, Split Ends, Groomer Has It, Mad Nation, and too many more. I'm not going to even name them more, so many. Here she is to talk about all things reality with me tonight, Marina Catela.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Marina. How are you?
A pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I sincerely appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely.
You know, no joke, reality is huge. It's growing. Every time someone prognosticates that it's going to go away, it just comes back twice as strong.
Absolutely. I mean, reality TV is just, the reality of reality is that there's so many networks, and it's so cheap for networks to produce that it's never going to go away. So embrace it, love it, hate it. Let's just hope scripted doesn't completely die. That's all I can say.
Well, and as we were saying right before we came on, with so many more networks and so forth, there's probably more scripted material now than maybe 5 or 10 years ago anyway.
Absolutely.
Because of cable and the CW and all those other
And
channels.
I would like to think that because there's so many reality shows as well, that ups the game. I think we've seen reality evolve over the course of 10 years since Survivor. And hopefully the quality has, I think some would argue that it's diminished, but I'd like to think that, we were still finding interesting stories and different ways to tell interesting stories about real people.
Absolutely. Now, specifically, let's talk about editing, and then how did you get into editing and then reality editing?
Sure. Well, I always wanted to work in television. I always specifically wanted to edit, so I went to the American Film Institute Conservatory and specifically got my master's degree in editing. And unfortunately, Steven Spielberg didn't call as soon as I graduated. So that said, I had to find a job just out of grad school. And so I had a fellow student had just graduated as well, and he found a job in reality TV as an assistant editor. And he needed a fellow assistant editor, and they hired me, and I just sort of climbed the ladder from there. And cut to 6 years later. And here I am. My career is exclusively in reality TV, even though scripted television was always what I had dreamed of doing. But
I love it. So even when you talk, you're editing. Cut to 6 years later.
Precisely. Yeah, I think I dream in edits. Actually, yeah, absolutely. So it was just as easy as that, oddly enough.
Now, for editing, is there a union for editing that you belong to, or how does that work, and how do you get into that union if there is?
It's sort of a complicated thing. There is something called the Editors Guild, which any person who works on a scripted television show or any union show would be a member of the Editors Guild. Now, as a general, the Editors Guild does not include reality editors. And actually, for that reason, I've let my standing as a member of the Editors Guild lapse because, I don't know, I take issue with the fact that they don't do anything for reality editors when, if you think about it, the very foundation of reality TV is the editing itself. So
yeah, huge part of it. And I might get back to you, talk about that a little bit towards the end of the interview, but I want to dive into The Biggest Loser.
Sure.
Because that is the current show you're working on,
right?
It is. So then tell me about editing for The Biggest Loser. What does the editing department look like? How many editors are there, and who does what?
Well, up until just the premiere of Celebrity Apprentice, which is now 2 hours, prior to that, The Biggest Loser was the only 2-hour reality show on television. And that presents a challenge within itself because, as the seasons go on, networks like to, let me see if I can remember the mantra right now. It's like, for the next season, it's always like, great, let's do it better, but for less money.
Right.
Right. Bigger, better, for half as much. So for The Biggest Loser, our edit schedule is pretty much the same as any 1-hour show. So that means pretty much twice the personnel. So we have, right now, we're in season 7, there's 19 episodes in season 7. So there's 5 edit teams of 2 and 3 floaters. So basically, I have a partner, and I cut about half the show. My partner cuts about half the show, and then we have a floater who cuts just a couple scenes here and there, maybe an act or two.
So when you're saying cut for some of the audience, you're getting footage of certain scenes, and you're deciding what parts of the scenes go together.
Right.
You're cutting them together.
Yeah, let me break it down, I guess, a little bit more. After everything is shot, Well, basically, one episode of The Biggest Loser, it consists of a week. It picks up from when one player is eliminated to when the next player is eliminated. And so you have a story team. You have a story producer and a story editor who are documenting that entire week. They're in the field, they're getting the interviews, pretty much piecing together what the story is. And then they go into, basically into the office, and they have 2 weeks to rough out what the episode is going to be. You know, sort of kind of rough out what the arcs are going to be, whose storyline we're really going to follow, and they put together what we call string outs. And that's sort of a string of kind of...
Series of events?
Series of events, yeah,
Host
for example.
welcomes everyone, says sorry to see so-and-so leave. This week we have you know, the big chef coming in, and we're going to do that.
Exactly. I mean, because every show has a formula, you know? I mean, and in the case of The Biggest Loser, we always pick up right after someone was eliminated, the feelings of the house as a result of it, and then we go into the very next day. It's a whole new week, and our host, you know, presents a whole new challenge.
Right.
And so the drama unfolds, and then you have a workout, and then you have the weigh-in, and then there's another elimination, and that's all sort of broken down.
So now back to you and your story producer. You're stringing that together.
We're stringing. Well, the story producer sort of roughs out how they want the episode to go, like where act breaks are. I mean, because act breaks, unlike scripted television, which are written in, we now have to find those. Figure out where is the most dramatic place to end an act to ensure that people are going to come back for the next act.
To put in the groovy music and then go to commercial?
Exactly, the dun dun dun.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so so the story producers have a couple weeks to kind of rough out the episode, and then those string outs are handed to the editors, and that's where we really, really edit, and we shape the story and really kind of mold what you ultimately see on the air.
And for one particular episode, how much time do you have?
From start of edit to lock is 6 weeks on The Biggest Loser, which...
So 6 weeks for one episode?
For one episode, which it sounds like a lot of time, but for 2 hours of television, which is essentially a feature, I mean, our runtime is like 84 minutes, it's a lot to edit.
Well, how many hours of footage are you working off of?
Oh man, that all depends. I mean, I would say our shooting ratio, that's probably what it's easier to break it down to, is probably 20-1. Because for a challenge, you could have as many as 17, 20 cameras rolling at the same time, and it all depends on how long the challenge takes place. Some can be as brief as 10 minutes. We had one just last week that was a 24-hour challenge. So imagine 17 cameras rolling for 24 hours. That's why we have a lot of people.
My math isn't that good, but 17 times 24 sounds like a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah. It's a lot. But a simple reality scene can be as simple as 2 cameras, and it's as long as the conversation, you know, actually is. Now, very often the conversations are very long, especially on The Biggest Loser, because, you know, we really try and explore the emotion of why people are as heavy as they are, and so that takes a little time.
So I just have this image of everyone being in a room, because you're telling me you have these editing teams, and it's like, all right, Marina, you're getting the 17-person scene, or 17-hour scene, and someone else gets like the 2-camera scene, and you're like, damn, you know?
With my co-editor, I mean, it's funny, we just had that conversation. He cut the challenge for the episode that I'm working on right now, and I cut the previous challenge. So going into the next episode that I'll be working on, I know I already have to take the challenge, and nobody wants to do the challenge. I mean, it's just to swim through a sea of cameras and all of those angles. It's honestly, I'm happiest when I have like 2 cameras. Fewer options. They didn't get it. They didn't get it.
Well, you know
what can I do?
There should be like a reality show for the editing teams, and you should get like immunity from like the really big camera scenes. That would be fun, right?
You should pitch that.
That's right.
I kind of like that.
Yeah.
I think only the editors would get a kick out of it, but
that's right.
Yeah.
Editors or Brian Grimaud would get a great kick out of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have an instant message coming in from Pennyman. What happened to Death TV, Pennyman? With TV editing is why so many shows use Avid over Final Cut Pro. I haven't figured out why tape to tape would need such an advanced system.
Why tape to tape would need such an advanced system? Well, I mean, I can speak, Pennyman, for why we use the Avid, and I would say, I mean, you're talking to an absolute Avid enthusiast. I've used Final Cut Pro, and I'm very impressed with what Final Cut Pro can do just on a prosumer level. But because you're dealing with so much media and so many users on a single project, you know, it's just, I don't think Final Cut Pro is sophisticated enough. I think it needs to be a hardware-based system, at least for now. And the Avid has that. I mean, you know, you were working on a $100,000 Avid system, and everybody has that. And we have a huge Unity system. I mean, it's, you know, it's like 5 terabytes or something like that. And I don't know enough about Final Cut to speak that intelligently on it, whether it's sophisticated or not, but in my limited experience with Final Cut, I find that it's pretty buggy. Let's just leave it at that.
Well, thank you for your question, Pennyman. So onto the technology question. How long have you been editing?
I've been editing, let's see, since I graduated back in 2003, so 6 years.
6 years. And maybe you were in a program that was a couple of years long?
I was.
So in that time, we've seen dramatic changes in camera technology. How about editing technology?
Editing technology. You know, I wouldn't necessarily say, the Avid is a pretty solid system. It's pretty similar to what I first started on. Of course, you know, always different versions, you know, have new bells and whistles, and I think you have seen that as reality has sort of evolved, it's gotten really flashy. You know, there's a lot of ramping, a lot of glow effects, and just craziness, which I think is an interesting sort of aesthetic for reality. I think it has developed its own aesthetic. But as far as the technology for the equipment itself, I think it's pretty close to what it was before.
And what about, you've worked on a lot of different shows, some on network, some on cable. Do you have different budgetary constraints, different equipment? Do you use cheaper equipment when you're on cable, less bells and whistles, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, in the early stages of my career, I worked on a lot of cable shows, shows like Madden Nation and Pros vs. Joes, you know, shows for Spike TV and Animal Planet, and obviously they have limited budgets because they have fewer viewers, understandably, and as a result, that's fewer less ad revenue, so budgets are smaller. And so, you know, just like any business, they're going to cut corners where they can, and that usually means we cut, for the longest time, I would cut on an Avid Express Pro, which I don't know if there's any editors out there, probably with their home system, but the Express Pro was a software-based version of Avid, and that certainly presented problems. Obviously on a big network show like The Amazing Race, Biggest Loser, NBC, CBS, they're willing to doll out a little bit more, so you get the nicer systems.
And that just makes your job a little bit easier, or are there things that you can do on the bigger budget ones that you can't do?
It's a combination of both. I mean, with Express Pro, you're limited by what it can actually do and what it can handle. It definitely crashes a lot more. With the more sophisticated systems, they're far more stable. They support a lot more plugins, and you can get away with a lot more.
Sounds good. Tom K. Video would like to ask or say, hi Marina.
Hi.
How did you get into editing, and what advice do you have for a film student trying to get into editing and directing? You kind of answered how you got into it.
I did. Yeah, Tom K., I would say as a film student, if you're specifically interested in editing, you know, I know you've probably heard it before, but take anything that comes along. I know you're probably going to have to work for free, which is really unfortunate, but you never know where your next job is going to come from, and it can always come from someone who you did a favor for. People have long memories in this town, for sure, and experience is really the best teacher when it comes to editing, without a doubt. And if you wanted to get into reality TV specifically, there's so many production companies around town who are looking for somebody who honestly is willing to work for nickels. I mean, let's be honest. And especially if you have already a background with the Avid or with Final Cut Pro, a nonlinear system, I would say cold call any you're looking for a post-production supervisor, a post coordinator, you know, and send them your resume, cold call. They're always looking for new people, without a doubt. And you know, if you're curious about like which company is doing a show that you really enjoy, just look at the credits at the end. It always says, you know, whether like Biggest Losers, Three Ball Productions, or Amazing Races, World Race Productions. Just look at the end of the credits. Watch your credits.
I think in scripted format, I've always found editors interesting to talk to, so I was interested to talk to you tonight too, because especially editors turn director in scripted formats, it's almost like they have the advantage in that they kind of know what they want it to look like in the end, so when they're on set directing, they have that different eye that a director without that experience has. So with reality, if there's people out there who have reality ideas and they're thinking about maybe trying to get creative with their own reality show, is there any advice you have for them breaking into reality on the creative side? On
the creative side, I mean, I would say, unfortunately, I don't know too much about development or pitching, but I would say, that's a good question. Definitely write out a treatment, and you know, find any contacts that you can who can kind of get you into somebody's office who's willing to listen to ideas and really challenge you and improve your reality ideas. Because I mean, you know, I think there's so many unexplored ideas in reality that.
Well, one thing, you know, again, in comparing scripted to unscripted, I do notice that reality seems to follow a similar beat structure almost to to scripted. There's the inciting incident that happens right off the bat, then there's the obstacles, and then there's the conflict, and then there's the cliffhanger, the resolution, and then reality adds its little slow-mo walk confessional to kind of cap it off. But there do seem to be that formula. Is that an accurate observation?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, reality TV, as much as it happens to real people, it's still entertainment. That's what we're trying to create. We're trying to tell stories, and stories follow a structure. You always need conflict, whether it be internal or external. Ideally, it's both, and we really try and create those external to elicit internal conflicts. And so you always need an inciting incident. That's why we create a challenge, usually per episode, because that elicits drama. I mean, that's what we're out to capture. A mentor of mine once said that documentary is capturing what actually happens. Reality is capturing a scenario that's produced. What's happening is real. I mean, it's really happening to people. They're playing this game, they're in this challenge, but it's a scenario that's completely...
You wouldn't find yourself in every day.
A bunch of overweight people aren't picked to live in a house to work out 8 hours a day, as a general. So so there's scenarios that are produced.
So if there was an actual situation where that existed and you turn the cameras on, that's a documentary. When you create the situation, it's a reality show.
Absolutely, and I think it's important to understand the distinction between documentary. I think the purpose of documentary, while to entertain, is really to inform. And I don't know that you learn a whole lot in reality TV, I'm sorry to say, but we're out to entertain. I mean, NBC wants 2 hours of entertainment. They want it as compelling and dramatic as possible. So, we really want to milk those tiers.
Well, and hopefully, The Biggest Loser is one of those shows that is helpful to people and inspires some people
Absolutely.
as well.
I mean, that's why I'm so proud to work on it. It's by far my favorite show that I've worked on, because you really do feel like people are changing their lives and the results speak for themselves.
Jutton77 would like to say, question, or comment. Reality shows seem to focus on the bad side of humanity. Do you get network notes like more fighting, don't trim the fight, cut the parts where they're being nice to each other? Good question, just after we talk about the one good example of The Biggest Loser. But, a point well taken. I'm interested to hear your answer.
Jutton77, that's a good question. I would say it all depends on the show. I've had the good fortune of working on shows like The Amazing Race, like The Biggest Loser, where the focus is less on fighting and more just the race, the competition, the game itself. But, working on a show like A Shot at Love with Tila Tequila, or From G's to Gents, the shows that make VH1 popular, those, we do want, going back to the question of entertainment, fighting is entertaining to people. I mean, that most certainly is the case. And so will I get a network note like more fighting? I can't recall. I know that I've definitely, on a scene in Beauty and the Geek from my season, there was a fight between two of the beauties, and it got, how do I say this in a PC way, ethnic. And so we actually got the note to dial it back, because I think the network was afraid that it was a little too urban. So that was actually the reverse of the network note that I think Jutton was referring to. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this then. Do personas and personalities develop within a reality show where, one, you know what to expect, you know kind of what the audience is looking for, and you play to those personality types, or you focus your editing on those specific personality types, showing person A behaving like this, B behaving like that?
Right. I would say absolutely. I mean, people have big personalities and people have no personalities, and so much of the success of a reality show is the casting. I can't stress the importance of casting enough. And casting really is that you look for personalities that will either work very well together, or they will not work well together, and there will be entertainment as a result of that. And it's invariable that certain personalities will dominate the show. Yeah. I'm like, that was a roundabout answer.
No, well, I have a good friend of mine who was on The Real World, and I know within her show she's known as like, the bitch or whatever, right?
Right.
And I know that some of these people on these shows, one, they're good friends with her off the show, and two, it's almost like if they want to get more airtime, they either talk mess about her or get in a fight with her, and they seem to get more airtime.
Absolutely.
The people that don't interact as much with her don't get the airtime.
For sure. I mean, I think that, you know, you get a combination of people when cast on a reality show. You have the people who want their 15 minutes of fame, and in that they obviously. As
an editor, do you know those people?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can just tell when someone's being sincere, you know, and I think that's the beauty of the camera, and I think that's why we're all film nuts, is because the close-up allows us to look into someone's eyes and you recognize truth, whether it's in a reality show, a scripted television show, or in a film, without a doubt. And so when those people want their 15 minutes of fame, they decide who they're going to be on the show and try to be that character. I've always said that in reality TV, we make good people seem better and bad people seem worse. But we don't control what they say, you know. So if they're being a bitch on television, of course we're going to show the story of them being a bitch. If they're a great person who's helping out all of their fellow castmates and are just really inspiring people, that's the story we're going to tell.
Okay, I'm going to challenge you a little bit here.
Okay.
Tell me if it's okay. Tell
Please.
me if it's fair. And I love the way you worked in Film Nuts into that last answer, by the way.
Like
Thank
that?
you very much.
I try.
That was very good. When it comes to confessionals, do reality personalities ever get like egged on or coached into saying certain things about other people that they're playing with?
Right. Okay, let's see if I can skirt around my non-disclosure agreements and do that. I would say in confessionals, it depends on the show. For example, on The Biggest Loser, when you see confessionals, part of the reason we do confessionals is because in an interview, maybe the contestant wouldn't feel as comfortable being honest, but alone in a room, they're a little bit more forthcoming, they're willing to vent, do whatever. And so on The Biggest Loser, we actually give them a piece of paper and ask questions, and they just sit down alone in a room and they answer the questions based off of the piece of paper. On Big Brother, for example, they're actually asked. Big Brother is a unique situation in that the house guests never, ever, ever see a single producer for the entire time they're in the house. So they go into the diary room and they actually hear the producers ask the questions. So, you know, if they give an answer that a producer maybe not be thrilled with, or that's not the angle they want to go for, they're often encouraged to maybe truncate their answer, rephrase, maybe something suggested, but it's the discretion of the producer and the show itself, I would say.
Okay, so.
Did I answer the question?
You did.
Okay, good.
I won't push you more than that.
Okay, fair enough.
We know, right? And then the other thing I wanted to ask you then is, and if you can answer, do you ever edit stuff in that's shown out of context? So something was shot later and put in to something that happened prior to it?
I would say as a general, no. I would say that when it comes to interview bites, you know, I mean, just we can take a phrase and use it out of context. I think that happens. I don't know if you've ever heard the term Frankenbite, but that's sort of the basis of what reality television is. It's whatever interview they've given, I basically lift and put together and piece together, and that's sort of what we do for a living. And so that is where we take things maybe out of context. You know, maybe a contestant was said, that was great in reference to the challenge, but I actually take that was great and put it in reference to how someone weighed in, the success of someone, if that makes sense. But scenes aren't usually taken out of context.
Okay. To get to some more IMs, Telemundo would like to ask, has there ever been footage you edit that the producer didn't like and has to go through edit over and over again?
Oh, all right, Telemundo. That probably brings us to the notes process. The notes process in reality TV is a really fascinating sort of experience, because I'll work with a story producer and I'll put an entire show together, and then you screen it with your supervising producer, and he or she gives notes.
Let's talk about that story producer first.
Sure.
Is that mutually creative, or are you how much say do you have in the creative process at this point?
I would say that when it comes to post-production, the story producer and the editor really are in the driver's seat as far as what the final episode is going to look like. You know, I work very, very closely with the story producer to figure out what story we're telling and how to tell it. You know, what characters to focus on, what story arcs to focus on, how to resolve those arcs. And so I would say that it's a really symbiotic relationship.
Wonderful. Okay, so then the next step.
So after we've pieced together, you know, we've our blood, sweat, and tears, put together 11 acts of a television show. This is for The Biggest Loser specifically. We screen it for our executive producer or our supervising producer. It's usually supervising producer first, and they'll give notes. It can be very broad notes, and then they can be very, very specific, like the scene isn't working, we need to rework this challenge. I mean, it can really get into the minutia. So that definitely happens. And then once we do those notes, we show it to the executive producer, and then a similar process happens. And then we give it to the network, and then a similar process happens. And it's a pretty tedious process.
So I'm thinking of Jutton 77. Do you ever get those notes that say, juice up that conflict, fire up, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think someone was crying in that scene. How come that's not there?
Yeah.
You know?
And I don't want to bemoan the notes process. I actually really, really benefit from them, because as an editor and the story producer work on a show, you know, we're really in the thick of it, and you begin to lose objectivity. I mean, because you've seen so many incarnations of a scene just working between the two of us before we ever screen it for anyone. And so we actually show it to our supervising producer and executive producer, because they have a general idea of the arc of every character. You know, I'm working within a single episode, so it can be kind of like a vacuum. And so I depend on them to give me notes, just in the sense of what can be played up, what can be, you know, sort of reined back, and just really, really tell as good a story as possible.
Do you develop people that you like or don't like, and do you find you have to watch yourself from being biased and showing them in a certain way? I mean, subliminally, maybe not even intentionally, but do you ever catch yourself like...
I mean, I'm totally biased. You know, it's like for as much as I don't watch a lot of reality TV, I always become a fan of the shows I work on, and I think that's important. Yeah, I think you have to be passionate about the stories that you're telling, whether or not you would watch them outside of your job. And so, of course, I always have favorites. You know, at just this season of The Biggest Loser, I love Kristen. She's fantastic. Tara is really inspiring. I just think they're phenomenal characters, and I love seeing their growth. But does it affect my editing? No, I don't think so. I think I can still remain objective and really always try to stay true to who these characters are and their arc as a general for the season.
Wonderful. Kupchak, he would like to chime in with, has there ever been a time where there was something so bad that couldn't be aired to where you needed to find stuff that you can cut to fill in the show? If so, how much longer can that process take?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Kupchak. It was so bad that couldn't be aired.
Couldn't be aired. Yeah, you had to find some cutaways or something else to fill it in.
Interesting. You know,
I think you can take that question one of two ways: creatively or technically.
Right.
It could have been messed up technically.
Yeah.
It could have been bad technically that you couldn't use it, or so bad that it couldn't air on network. Right.
Right.
I'm not sure which one he means, but I can see both.
I would say that. We'll do the more fun ones.
Okay, let's do the more fun. Sure. Yeah.
Let's do, like, working on A Shot at Love with Tila Tequila. You can imagine what didn't make air. You know, I mean, it was a bunch of lesbians, bisexuals, and 20-year-old straight guys living in a house with...
It sounded like an oh my sense,
absolutely, and alcohol, oh my. So there was definitely some scenes on a pole that we tried to work in that we just couldn't. I worked on a challenge where they actually had to eat a bull's penis and testicles, and they definitely played with those items quite a bit that we tried to work in, but
little softball game during the
no, I wouldn't say that.
Didn't go there. Okay.
No, I think it was a bit more oral.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and network just didn't let that fly. So how's that, Kupchak?
That's a good one. I should have kept my yap shut on that, not open the door for you on that one.
I think everybody enjoyed that one.
Sean Zero would like to ask, of all the shows Marina has worked on, was there one that you found the most challenging?
Sean Zero, that's a really good question. I would say without a doubt, The Amazing Race was the hardest show I've ever worked on. There's something about the logistics of the show. I don't know if you've seen the show, but it's 11 teams of 2 in a race around the world. And it's such a run and gun kind of experience because you're following every team as they're doing the challenges in each leg of the race. So you have to imagine that there's 2 challenges per episode times 11 teams in the most insane parts of the world. And the struggle of telling not only what's happening and how each team is doing, but making it competitive, because it's really breaking it down to making it a race for first, a race for last, a race for the middle, and just sort of following the bouncing ball. I mean, it's entirely editorial, and I just have such tremendous respect for the editors who who make that happen every day.
Now, off the top, I can instantly understand why, from a shooting perspective, a show like that would be harder. From an editing perspective, is it more hours of footage? Is it technically harder, or is it creatively just frying your brain a little bit more as you try to put this story together? Is it more hours of footage?
It's not more hours of footage, because as a general, the cameras are only rolling when they're doing the challenges themselves or figuring out how to get to the challenge. But what makes it difficult, how do I explain it? What makes it difficult is that there's no real structure to it. Whereas with The Biggest Loser, it's just that, we have, basically the cameras are only rolling when our host is presenting a challenge, when they're doing the challenge, and when they're working out. But and so that's very structured. It's a very controlled environment.
You show up for work and you know exactly what you're doing with The Biggest Loser.
Right, exactly. Whereas with The Amazing Race, anything can happen. I mean, and the camera guys are just following it as it's happening. They have no control. They have no idea where these people are going to go, whether they're going to take the wrong train, whether they're going to miss their plane. And so without any rules, it's now entirely upon the editor to craft a story and make it competitive and sort of heart-pumping, and it's an interesting challenge.
So it's a good creative challenge, huh?
Absolutely. It's why it wins the Emmy every year.
Now, music is a very big part of reality TV.
Definitely.
How involved are you, I should say, in the music aspect of the editing? Do you do picture editing first, music second? Do you coordinate with each other?
Every editor has their own different workflow. As an editor in reality TV, I'm responsible for the audio and the visual. So I'm responsible for all the sound design, music, as well as picture editing.
And of course you get paid extra for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's not talk about the union. My process is I like to cut picture first, and then put in the music, and then sort of adjust picture according to the music. Other editors are different, some just really like to set the tone for the scene and will choose the shots and sort of pace the scene accordingly. It all depends on just sort of what your preferred workflow is. I just like to tell the story first, and then I find the music that suits the story. That's just my process.
Well, I think you do a great job with that, from what
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would imagine then for prospective editors out there, watch, if you're interested in getting a reality, watch it first for picture, but then watch a show again and try to ignore the picture and just listen to the music, because the music does so much of telling the story. Am I correct there?
Yeah, I think it sort of sells what we do. I mean, I don't want to call it cheating, but I mean, there's the reason why it's wall-to-wall music. You rarely hear reality TV shows go dry, just because there's something about reality TV that the images themselves, I don't think, can always stand alone. And so the music sort of just kind of gives us that little extra emphasis.
Yeah, it really matches the mood of what's going on.
Exactly.
Jay Murphy would like to ask, will you ever not work for the studios, but instead is there a future in projects like DrHorrible and The Guild and the Stream.TV?
Oh, Jay Murphy, you're speaking my language when you talk about DrHorrible. The dream was always to work in scripted, of course, but unfortunately, nobody's come calling. And sort of the reality of this business is, I don't want to say you get pigeonholed, but when you fall into an aspect of the industry, that's where your contacts are. That's where you move up, and so that's sort of where I have accelerated. And I gotta say, for as much as I wasn't a fan of reality TV before I started in it, I have a tremendous amount of respect for how difficult it is, because the editing is so integral. And as much as I always would have loved to cut like something like DrHorrible or Buffy or anything Joss Whedon has ever touched, I know I have a lot more creative input as a reality TV editor than I ever would have as a scripted editor. So, I don't know. If given the opportunity, if you have a project for me, let me know. How's that?
That's good interactivity right there. It doesn't get better than that. Biscuit would like to ask, was there ever something the producer asked you to edit, possibly out of context, that you did not feel comfortable portraying? And is the environment such that you have to do it for the job, or is there a leeway?
That's a good question. Let's see, Biscuit. I would say I had an episode of The Biggest Loser this past season where, I don't know if you're a fan of the show, but the mom and the daughter both fell below the yellow line, and it was decided by the mother and daughter that the daughter should go home. And we sort of took the angle that, how could this mother do this? We just sort of made it out to make her a little bit more of the villain. And you know, both my producer and I, we definitely paused on that one, just because while that was the story to a certain degree, the fact that a mother would let her daughter go home even though she needed to lose the weight just as much as the mother did, she still was willing to go home, and we just sort of cut that out and just sort of implied that the mother was a little heartless. And I definitely took some issue with that one, but ultimately that was the decision that the supervising producer and especially the executive producer, that's the angle they wanted to take, and I definitely don't get final cut. So
that's interesting. You know, in reality, if you ever get put into that position where, you know, you might be asked to be involved in something that you're morally against. I mean, otherwise it's just a matter of, yeah, just knowing the chain of command and who has final say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's for as much as I have a lot of creative control, there's no question that the executive producer and the networks, that's just, if they want it,
right,
that's just how it is. And especially the network. I mean, they're the ones signing the checks. So occasionally an executive producer will fight, you know, for something that, you know, they really believe in, but network signing the check.
Now, earlier, I believe you mentioned that it takes 6 weeks to do one episode of The Biggest Loser.
It does.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now, what is your work day like? Is it a 9 to 5 type of situation? Is it...
So that's a good question. I mean, I think that I think any sort of person who's familiar with the industry knows that reality TV it can be an abusive business because we are not protected by any union. So I've worked on shows where I've had to pull 90-hour weeks. Definitely you get in at 9 and you're there till 1 a.m., 2 a.m. One of the reasons I love The Biggest Loser so much is not only is it a wonderful show, but it's a pretty reasonable schedule. You know, on average, in reality TV, you're expected to work a 10-hour day. So 10 to 8.
10 to 8
is my hours. Are my hours. Mm-hmm.
But it's not unheard of for that to be 10 to 4 in the morning?
It's not unheard of, absolutely, and for that to be 6 or 7 days a week, that most definitely happens. There's a lot of abuse in reality.
So yeah, you know, you just alluded to it right now, and we have a couple of times, and I know, you know, there was the writer's strike, and some people may not be aware of it, but one of the things that the writers were trying to hold out for was to unionize the writers for reality TV and to get them health and pension benefits and so forth. I know with this thing going on now with the actors in the AMPTP, people are talking about how many actors and crew get their benefits, you know, because of the unions and the deals that they currently have with the AMPTP, but reality does not. There's no health and pension benefits, is that correct?
That's correct.
You can work 90-hour work weeks.
There's no overtime.
Like you just said. How did you feel about the writers fighting for you and the fact that most of the rest of the town pretty much doesn't think very much of you, you know, in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely conflicted. I mean, for the most part, I was flattered and incredibly moved that the Writers Guild was moving for us, because they do recognize what they specifically want story producers and editors in the Writers Guild, because they recognize that we are the storytellers, we are the crafters of the story in reality TV. We don't sit in front of, you know, our final draft and look at a blank page and actually literally write, but in some cases we do. I mean, anything that a host says is written. They're just not spontaneously speaking. I've written copy for my hosts, I can't tell you how many different times, or ordered pickups or things like that, that this is the story that we're trying to tell here. And so in that sense, I do feel like I'm a writer on a show and that I should be protected as a result of that. This is a union town, and it's proudly a union town. And for an aspect of the industry, because it's new and not really respected, still for all of those people to be abused, I do take issue with. But at the same time, people need to work, and I wanted my shows back, so I was
Kind of torn, huh?
I was proud that the Writers Guild held on as long as they could for us, but I understood when they let us go.
Well, and you know, forget Uniontown. I mean, most jobs, when you work 40 hours a week, you know, many jobs, and you get benefits. I've had a lot of jobs in my survival out here in LA. Most of them didn't involve unions. Most of them provided benefits.
Right.
You know, health insurance at least. You know, something.
I mean, some
sort of access.
Every job I've ever worked on, you lie on your time card. I mean, that's just a given. You just write worked, and whatever worked is, whether that's a 40-hour week, which I don't know anybody who works a 40-hour week in reality TV, or whether it's more likely a 60 or 70-hour work week. No pension, no benefits, no vacation time. I mean, no sick pay. No sick
day, right?
No, nothing.
I mean, these are things that, union or not union.
Well, they're federal labor laws.
Right, exactly.
I mean, it's
right.
basic law.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. But, sort of the vibe in reality is that there's so many people in this town who are lining up behind you to take your job and are willing to work under those conditions that you're pressured into you just do it and you don't think about it. And it's really unfortunate. There's a lot of people in reality without health care.
Well, the Writers Guild has not forgotten about you because they're still kind of protesting.
They sure are.
Fremantle, one of the biggest reality production companies that I think they're involved with American Idol or something.
That's right.
So I know they're still fighting the cause for you guys.
They most definitely are. I've actually gotten calls from them in the past to attend their rallies, and I even picketed when they struck America's Next Top Model. And America's Next Top Model, as a result, does not have story producers. The editors are the producers themselves.
So you kind of, I think, answered most of my question in terms of what do writers do on reality. So you write copy for the hosts,
yep.
You structure the story, but you're not actually writing stuff for the contestants.
No. I mean, what contestants say on a reality show is what they say. They're not really, they're asked a question, like in a sit-down interview,
right.
They'll be asked a question, or maybe encouraged even to reword it, like if they give a really long answer, like I tend to do, just sort of to truncate that and be a little bit more concise. But, contestants aren't told what to say. That's what makes it an interesting sort of challenge. But we're still the storytellers, and I think that's the distinction that some people sort of are in favor of or against when it comes to whether we're the writers.
Now, I'm almost afraid to ask you this question because what's the weirdest thing that's ever happened? But you already kind of mentioned the Tila Tequila thing. I'm thinking there can't be anything weirder than that, right?
No, that's definitely one of those moments where you're just like, yeah, thanks for paying for that film school education, Mom and Dad. Yeah, it really paid off. That's definitely among the weirder ones, for sure.
Do you have, you mentioned the difference between reality and documentary. Have you ever worked on a documentary yourself?
I have never worked on a feature-length documentary. A couple years back, I went out and shot a documentary in the hopes of actually piecing it together sort of as a promotional package in order to raise money to do the documentary as a feature. But that, unfortunately, I could not find funding. But I might try again.
And what was that editing like? Was it pretty much what you said? It was just going into a natural situation and capturing footage?
Absolutely. Just in terms of documenting, it was an interesting challenge just being a shooter after bemoaning the shooting of so many people as an editor. It's just very easy to sit in front of your Avid and how could they not get that and focus. But to actually be out in the elements, it was an interesting challenge to just sort of run and gun and have the camera at the ready when anything is happening. But as far as the editing was concerned, I found that I definitely had picked up some bad habits in reality TV.
Such as?
Frankenbiting, just really wanting to craft what people were saying as opposed to just letting them say it organically in their own words. So I really had to kind of hold myself back.
Good deal. Is there any reality show that you haven't worked on that you'd like to work on? Or what would be your favorite reality show that?
I don't watch a whole lot of reality, but I would say that I love the Magical Elves shows, Project Runway and Top Chef. I think those are really strong, good reality shows. They tell interesting stories, they're good challenges, they're well cast. And I like shows where it's seeking genuine talent. I do watch American Idol, and I love So You Think You Can Dance. Yeah, again, people really trying to live their dream and find genuine talent out there. So
wonderful. Now, I'm assuming that even though it's reality, there's still set term speak going on. So one thing we like to ask guests is, what is your favorite set term speak? Like, if it was a film, maybe Back to One or Checking the Gate or one of those types of terms.
Good question. Wow, on the spot right now. Hold on, I'm trying to think. I know, a set term. I'm trying to think. What do I don't know.
Chloe, do you want to come out and dance for him?
How about just we'll fix it in post?
We'll fix it in post.
Because we always do.
I don't think that would be your least favorite thing.
It is, but you know what? It's part of what the satisfaction of any challenge that you sort of encounter. The fact that you can figure it out. We'll fix it in post.
Now, before we let you go, any spoilers that you won't get thrown in jail for telling us, or what we can expect coming up for the rest of the season on The Biggest Loser?
No, I really can't tell you that, but all I can say is buckle up. It's about to get even crazier on The Biggest Loser. I don't know if anybody watched last night's episode, but there is a thrilling conclusion, and when things go to singles, it hits the fan. So, how's that?
On Hitting the Fan, we are going to get out of here.
All right.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure.
It was a real pleasure talking to you. Good luck with the rest of this season.
Thank you so much.
And all your continued endeavors. Look forward to many more great shows from you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you one and all for tuning in. A pleasure coming to you for the second time in the new studio digs. And we will see you next week on Filmnut.
Huh?